In this project, we're going to be building a nav bar that has a hamburger menu, so it's going to be responsive. And the cool thing about this is it doesn't use any JavaScript. We're just going to have essentially like an invisible form field, a checkbox that's going to activate the nav bar or the hamburger menu on mobile. So let's jump right in. You can see it here in the browser on desktop, and then when we, shrink it down, it's going to show the hamburger menu, and then when we click on it, it's going to display the drop-down menu. So that's what we're going to be building today. And we've got a blank slate in the browser. If we go to Visual Studio Code, you're going to see that I've got the final solution here, HTML and CSS, and I have some notes, just stuff to keep in mind while we're building this. And then I've got two blank pages. I got index.html, styles.css. I've linked the styles.css to the HTML with a link element. So I'm using the href attribute and the rel attribute, which is the relationship. What is the relationship of the CSS or the external file? And that's going to be, it's a style sheet. And then the href is just whenever you have a link, you're linking, in this case to the styles.css file. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's build out the HTML. That's, the first step we want to start with. So what we can do is we can go ahead and use the nav element, and then we're going to use a div element as well internally, and that's going to be a div with a class of container. And then within this container, we're going to hold multiple items. So it's going to hold the logo. It's going to hold the checkbox that's going to be invisible when we are finished with it. But it's the logo, the checkbox that will activate the dropdown, the hamburger menu itself, so the label for that, and then it's going to be the list of links. So we've got the container. The next thing we have is a logo with a class of logo. And we can just say Navbar tutorial. We can then say we want to, we're going to add the invisible checkbox, and that's going to have 2 parts. It's going to have the input, which is type checkbox. It's got the ID of menu toggle. And then for the label, so the input will be hidden, and then the label is going to be the hamburger menu actually, which is really cool. So attribute, for attribute, and it's going to link to the ID menu toggle, so that's how it's connected. The checkbox is linked to the label, which is the visual hamburger menu that we're adding. And then there's a special Unicode character that we're going to use, which will display the hamburger menu like so. And then we're going to add the list of links with just an unordered list. We're going to use the list tags, multiple of them. We're going to add our links. And we're going to use home, and let's add more of these links. We're going to have 4 links: home, about, services, and contact. And then I'm just going to use just a hashtag since we're not actually linking today for this tutorial. Just going to get the nav bar up and running. And that should be it. That should be everything. And if we go back to the browser, we're going to see that here. So we see the logo, we see the checkbox, the input field, and then the label, which is the hamburger menu. That's that Unicode character, and it is essentially 3 lines, which is that hamburger menu. And then we have the list of links in bullets. So we're going to take that and turn it into this. And if we can, as always for CSS, we're going to start with mobile and then expand to desktop, and we're gonna create this. So let's go ahead, get started. let's hop into our CSS since it's already linked previously, so we can hop right in. And how we can start with this, whenever you're kind of wondering how to start with CSS, one helpful way to do it is, just start outward and work your way inward. So we're going to start with, just some general, some reset. So we can say, margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box, just some general styles. And then we're kind of want to work our way inward. So we've got, we've got the body, we've got the nav, we've got the container div, we've got the logo with a class of logo, we've got the input field. So we've got the input, you can just say input. We can say, or actually we have an ID with it, so we'll say we got the input with an ID of menu toggle, and to do an ID you start with a hash symbol. We've got the label, which is that hamburger menu icon, and then we have the unordered list, we've got the list, and we've got the A tags. So these are all, essentially I just worked my way down. So if you're wondering, how to start with CSS, how do you go about, optimizing your CSS, is, this is one way to do it. And I think it could be helpful when you're first starting out, just to, get used to, how do you start with styling. And I essentially just worked my way inward: body, nav, the div, the other div for logo, input, label, unordered list, list, and link. So that's all I did, and you see all those styles here. I just named the element, and then I added curly braces. And then, for classes you start with a period, for IDs you start with a hash. And then for, the next step is, we want this responsive, and so to do that we want a media query. So we always start with mobile, so all your styles by default, just assume they're mobile. And then for any changes, you can add breakpoints, and breakpoints are added through media queries. And so you can do @media min width 800 pixels, like so. So once we hit tablet, it's no longer going to be that hamburger menu. It's just going to be the list of links in a horizontal row. And so we've added this media query, and we're going to add styles or rule sets within the media query for anything that we want different on tablet and desktop. And so 800 pixels is just that marker that I've chosen, that's around tablet, you can say. So now we've started styling. So, the first thing we can do is, start from the top and work our way inwards. So for starters, let's see, what shall we do first? We can go ahead and, for one, we can add in the body, we can say, font family. Let's use Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif as our font family. Okay, now we want our nav bar to have a background color as starters. As you can see here, we've got a background color. We want the container, which holds everything, our logo, our hamburger menu, our links. We can say max width 900 pixels, and then we can say, let's see, so if we look at our HTML, we want, and if we look at our code, we essentially start with, or what we can do, currently everything is in vertical fashion. So what we want to do is make it in a horizontal row. So to do that, we want our container to be flex. So display flex. Okay. And then we want display flex. We want our unordered list. So the list of links, we want that also to be display flex. And we want it to start in a flex direction of a column because we're doing mobile first. So the links will be in a column first, the list of links. And then on mobile, we want this to be flex direction row. So that's the start. We also, let's start easy. We can start with some colors. Let's start making this a bit more visible. So with our nav bar, we can, for one, add color of white, change the nav bar logo to white. We want our links, or the list of links, we want, for one, we don't want any decoration. So text decoration to be none. We want no bullets, so we get rid of the styles that we have for the list. We want that to be none. And we want our links to also be white, like so. Okay. And let's put this down to mobile so we can see it a bit better. Okay. And the next thing we want to do, so essentially we've made everything flex, but we want to move the list of links out of the normal flow. And to do that, we're going to use a position of absolute. So we're going to, let's go ahead, and that's going to help, clean things up a bit. So we're going to say position for the list of links. We want it absolute, so out of the document flow. And we want it to say top 50 pixels. We can say the container height is 50 pixels as well. So top 50 pixels. We want left to be 0, right to be 0. So position absolute. Now we've positioned it out of the flow. We want to see it, so let me just show you. There. So we've just positioned it out of the flow. How do we do that? It was currently in the flow in a horizontal row, but we've used position absolute to get it out. We said top 50. So top 50 takes it from the top and moves it down 50 pixels. And then left and right of 0 is going to make it the whole, essentially the drop down, take up the full width. And so that's what we're doing here. We're saying left 0 and right 0 to make it take up the whole width. And then top is bringing it down 50 pixels because the normal bar is 50 pixels, like so. And we're just, adding some extra spacing there. Okay, great. And then we've done flex. We want, in the example here, just to, start making this a little bit cleaner, we want everything to go in the center. So to do that with a flex direction of column and display flex, we can say align items center. So normally when you want to center from left to right, it would be justify content, but since we're using column, everything's like reversed in a way. And so that's what we're doing here. Perfect. Okay. Now the next thing we can do, here we go. As you can see, the next thing we can do is, you see this checkbox, we don't want to see that currently. So let's get rid of that. And so we want to go to the toggle, the ID. So the ID is the input or the checkbox. We don't want to see that, so we can say display none. It's going to be hidden. We also want the hamburger menu to be all the way on the far right. And to do that, so if we're just looking at Navbar and tutorial, we've already, since we've done position absolute, this is out of the question now. The only thing in this container that's relevant is going to be the logo and the hamburger menu. And so if we go back to the container, you'll see that we've done display flex, but what we can do is we can say, hey, justify content, space between. And that's going to push the hamburger menu all the way to the other end. We can also give the logo a bit more size. We can say font size of 1.2 rem. And then we can say the label, which is the hamburger menu, we can say font size, we can make it a little bit bigger, 1.5 rem. So rem is relative to essentially the browser in a way, so of sizing. So 1 rem is generally, it's going to be that 16 pixels, And then so 16 pixels, 1.2 of a greater size than that, and then 1.5, which would be like 1.5 would be like 24 pixels, 16 plus 8. So 24 pixels there. And then that's going to increase the size. Now, a couple other things. We want to, adjust some spacing. So for a desktop, a couple things here. We want to remove the hamburger menu. So let's go ahead and do that on desktop. We want to say, hey, for the label, we want to say display none. And then we want to say for the unordered list, we want to change the position back to relative. Okay. And then we want to say it's no longer top 50, it's just top 0. And now you see we've moved it back into the flow. We can say for the links, actually, so the links, we want to adjust the padding. And so you can see that they're all smashed up against each other, so we're just adding some padding here. So we say 0, 0, 0. We're going to just add left padding of 1.5 rem, space it out. You can see that the Navbar tutorial logo is currently touching the top, but we want it centered so it's in line with everything. And so we need to go back to our container and not just say space between, but we want to align items center. And so now Navbar is in line. So we had our container. We said space between to separate them for the hamburger menu at the time, and then we said, align items center to bring everything center as well. And we can say padding of 1 rem, I believe. Let's see. Something like that. Okay. And then you'll notice that we should probably center this as well. So let's say, I don't believe we can do this, but let's try it. Let's use flex. We're going to use flex for the nav bar. So display flex, and we're going to say justify items center, or justify content. Okay. Actually, let's see. We'll come back to this, but we'll need to center that because that's off. But we've got, you can start to see it's coming into shape. And the next step, really the key thing we want, well, we can also, let's add some padding here. So the list of links, let's add some padding. Let's compare it. Oh, let's do 1 rem. Looks about right to me. So you see, we're getting pretty close now. We can even say, if we want to say like the logo, font, weight of bold. I think that's, yeah, there we go. So we've got pretty much identical, I want to say, to the final solution. And then now we want to activate this. So let's first activate the hamburger menu. And this is kind of where all the magic happens. So here we're going to say we want to target the menu or the input, the checkbox. So menu toggle, and we're going to do a pseudo class. We'll say, hey, when it's checked, then we're going to take when the toggle is checked, we're going to say, hey, give me back, or we're going to say the sibling of label. So the next sibling is label, and then the next sibling is the unordered list. And then we're going to say display flex here, and then we're changing this to display none. So we don't want to see the drop down. Display none for the drop down now, and then on the checkbox, when the checkbox is clicked, or really the hamburger is clicked, it's going to say display flex. And you'll see that here. So let's break down what I just did so you understand it. Essentially, we are using a pseudo class. So the menu toggle, so here, the input has an ID of menu toggle. When it's checked, so there's unchecked and checked. So there's a special pseudo class you can use that's checked, and we use a colon. So the ID, so we're capturing it. Then we say, hey, when it's checked, we want to show the menu. So when it's checked, and then we're saying plus label plus UL. What does that mean? So that is the, it's like a sibling selector. And so we're trying to get over to, we're saying when this is checked, display the list, the unordered list. But to get there, we need to use the sibling selector. So sibling selector, how it works is whatever's adjacent to or next to in the HTML is going to be styled. So we're doing it twice essentially. So we're doing it once to get to the label, and then another time, another plus to get to the unordered list. And so that's what we're doing here. So the input, label, and unordered list aren't all getting styled. The only thing getting styled is the unordered list, which is we're saying, hey, when it's checked, when this pseudo class is checked, display flex. And then we've hidden, normally in the mobile, we've hidden the list and only have shown the hamburger menu, as you can see here. So we've only shown it. And then we click on it to display it. The label is clickable because it's linked to the input, and so that's why it's working. So you don't see the checkbox, that doesn't, it's hidden, but it's linked to the label, which is the hamburger menu, and so that's why it's displaying here. Cool. Okay, so we're almost finished. The last thing I want to, fix is centering it. And we're gonna, give me a few seconds, and then if not, we can look at the solution. But we just need to center this and see. Let me see why it's not centering. Let's see. We've got the nav bar. We want the container in the nav bar to be centered. Let's do display flex, and we'll say with full. Okay, that's centered. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I just, instead of max width, I just set a width. I think that's why it's not working, but now it is. Okay, close enough. So essentially, you can see it here as, this is what we made, and it shrinks, and you'll see, we can untoggle and toggle the drop down based on that input field we added. And so here's the final solution, and that is what we just did. Close enough, right? So we can compare it just to check, but overall that's the tutorial today. And we can check really quick here: container, logo, checkbox, menu toggle, the list of links. So the HTML is pretty straightforward, which is nice. And then the CSS, for the most part, it's going to be pretty similar, but maybe some slight differentiating options. And that looks good. You can, of course, take things further, and you can add, like, for instance, in my previous code, it was, cursor pointer. So you can add a pointer to make it, a bit clearer, like, hey, you're selecting the hamburger menu instead of just, the normal cursor, which is nice. So you could do cursor pointer. That's one thing I'll mention. But besides that, I think we're good. That's pretty much everything today. So what did we do? We built a navbar, responsive navbar with a hamburger menu, and once it goes down to mobile, that hamburger menu displays, and you're able to click on it, not with any JavaScript, just with using a standard input field that you would use for like a form. And that will reveal and hide the dropdown. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching.